When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 116. Letting go of all that was familiar to her, and she climbed a brand new ladder right to the top. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Genevieve Pituro. Genevieve is a TEDx speaker, teacher, and 7-time award-winning Amazon best-selling author who founded Pajama Program in 2001 after a life-changing encounter with a 6-year-old girl in a homeless shelter. This moment led her to leave a successful career as a TV executive to pursue a purpose-driven path. Genevieve's journey has taken her from that little girl's question to being featured on Oprah, in boardrooms, and on stages across America, where she shares her insights on the power of purpose-driven leadership and the importance of the human connection. As an inspirational speaker, author, and consultant, Genevieve teaches others to be a voice that moves the world, offering personalized keynotes that emphasize the vital roles of purpose and the human connection in leadership and team building. Her best-selling book, Purpose, Passion, and Pyjamas: How to Transform Your Life, Embrace the Human Connection, and Lead with Meaning, and her recent workbook, Purpose, Passion, and Moxie: How to Lead the Way and Leave a Legacy, provide guidance on living and leading with purpose. Genevieve has been featured on numerous major media platforms and rang the NASDAQ bell in 2016, underscoring her impact as a leader and advocate for meaningful change. Well, hello there, Genevieve. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you, Salima. I am ready.
You are ready. This is awesome. It's really so great to have you on the show today as a guest. I am really grateful for your willingness to be here to tell your story. I share often on the podcast that I'm always humbled to encounter guests just like yourself who allow me to tap into their vulnerabilities and draw on their strength and insight, all the inspiration that gets shared into this space. It's really incredible that we both take a stance together to help break down barriers of mental stigma. So I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, me too. And I hope that we can reach whoever needs to hear our message today.
Awesome. I'm sure it's going to reach people, that's for sure. And of course, Genevieve, in case you're still wondering, I'm not sure that you are, but just in case, this podcast is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. So, this platform is a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So, just like you said, hopefully we're going to reach the people who need to be reached. So, today, together, for both of us, my hopeful mission is for us to be able to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, Genevieve, I continue to bring forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. So, immediately, what are the first thoughts or words that come to your mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
I think you've touched on something very personal that we share. So while it's personal that we all have our mind just scrutinizing us and sometimes telling us things that just aren't true and scaring us out of doing things that we want to do, feel right. I think you're helping us to know that this is something we share, but it's also something that is not the way we're supposed to be living. And if we all can embrace how we want to live, we'll get that health and mental health reboot that we need to just do it, to band together, to share our stories, and to be brave and to be free.
Absolutely. And there was multiple reasons as to sort of how the mental beauty and mental beauty rethink phrase came to be. But one that I know is really important is that, we often see the physical health and mental health seen in silos. They're treated separately. They're spoken about differently. They're separated. For me, I see it on a regular basis about how physical health will affect your mental well-being, and your mental well-being will affect your physical health. There is that crossing that happens. And so if we are able to look at embracing the idea that all is welcome, as opposed to feeling like one is okay to talk about and the other one is, taboo, we shouldn't go there. That would help a great deal in sort of cracking it down a little bit more, bit by bit.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. We hide what we think other people can't see, but it's inside out, so people can see. And we are projecting our self-doubt and our insecurities if that's how we feel inside.
So we might as well embrace it all, right? And not just for ourselves, but for other people too, right? So even the way we view other people, it doesn't have to be, not that we're all viewing things negatively, but I don't think sometimes as humans, we realize that we might be viewing other people negatively or in a particular assumptive light,
I know we're so caught up in self-preservation. It's sad, when we spend probably more of our time worrying about how we come across and how are we being seen than feeling like, standing tall and saying, this is me and I'm proud of me. I like me and I'm going to do what makes me feel good. And I know that in doing that, I'm sharing the joy and I'm serving the best way I can.
Absolutely. Right. So it's really great that we had this discussion. I always love asking this question. I always find the responses to be so rich. So thank you so much for sharing such insightful messages about what comes to your mind when you hear the mental beauty rethink words. So thank you. All right. So I'm ready to dive deep with you today and uncover your untold story. Shall we, Genevieve?
I am ready.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's get to it. For that first question, Genevieve, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it say?
Salim, I think that's a great question. For my story, it would be, it's never too late to find your purpose.
It's never too late to find your purpose. Okay, so can you touch on what this means for you without actually giving away your untold story?
Yes. For so many of us, and I touched upon it just a few minutes ago, we are planning our lives and we are living the way we want people to see us. And that's come from either our parents, our families, our society, where we grew up, our culture, so many things impact our decisions
Right.
as an adult. And I think we do find out along the way, it's never too late,
Mm-hmm.
that there was something that I kept pushing down in my heart that kept popping up, like, you should be doing this, or you really love this, but you got caught up doing that. It's too late, but I have to look at all the things that I'm grateful for, never mind what I really wanted to do that I overlooked.
Mm.
And that happened to me. And I think that happens to a lot of people. So I like to share my story and my work because I think it gives people permission to say, doesn't matter how old I am or
Mm-hmm.
what I did in the first chapter. Look at this woman. She's up there and she took a chance and she bared her soul. I'm not alone. And I think that's most comforting to people, to me too, to know I'm not alone and I'm not being stared at for something that's, embarrassing or humiliating. It's something that I think we all understand. And to some degree, we all do, is ignore, what we're meant to do here.
Right. Absolutely. It's such a powerful message. And, I hear so much of your emphasis on permission to free yourself. And maybe when we're pushing our passion down, we have all these reasons as to why it seems reasonable or rational to push our passion down or not to explore something. And it sounds like we're inching towards learning about how you didn't do that, how you undid all of that.
Yeah, I did it for a while.
Yeah. You started on a path. And then when you actually give yourself a chance to recognize, oh, I can do it differently. And then you went ahead and did it. It's very inspiring. And I think it's very eye opening for people to hear about. So let's go there. Let's unpack that story. So,
Yes, yes,
so tell us what your untold story is all about, Genevieve. Give us that snapshot.
of course. So, as I mentioned, I wanted success as a woman in the business world. And that came from other people. It came from television shows. I wanted to be the Mary Tyler Moore character of Mary Richards, single woman in a big city,
Mm-hmm.
reaching her goal of working in a man's world,
Mm-hmm.
being a producer. And I wanted that. To me, that was success and that was style and that was independence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pursued that for 12 years and I was pretty far up that ladder. And I had a crazy, busy workaholic life,
Mm-hmm.
copied the woman I saw on television, and I was pretty jazzed about it.
Mm-hmm.
But 12 years in that workaholic, crazy, busy life, I had a moment alone in my living room and I heard a voice in me ask me
Mm.
this question. If this is the next 30 years of your life,
Mm-hmm.
is this enough?
Right.
And Salima, that stopped me cold.
Mm.
I I had never heard myself talk to myself. No one ever told me, sit quietly and this is word called meditation and you learn what's really going on in your soul. I had none of that type of education or guidance.
Right.
So to hear this voice
Mm-hmm.
in me startled me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I knew it was real.
Mm-hmm.
I knew something was going on. I knew this was a message.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought about it for literally seconds, I thought, it's not enough because I can just imagine 30 more years of this crazy running ragged life alone,
Mm-hmm.
no time for family, no desires for anything other than, the next rung on the ladder in the business world. I'm going to be alone. I'm going to be alone and I'm going to have pretty things, period. And I thought, that feels so empty. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess I felt full up to that point because it was all just, going so fast. I never stopped to think about it. Is this really fulfilling me? I mean,
Right.
I didn't do that. But when I realized that question was a message and that my answer was no,
Mm-hmm.
it's not what I want in 30 years, I started to think somehow freely. And my mind went to a news report of police and social workers storming into an apartment to grab children who had been hurt there, supposedly being taken care of by family, but it was the opposite. And I don't know why, maybe because I was conscious of the fact that I was on a different path than being a wife and a mother, but the children came into my memory of this newscast, and I started to feel this pain, my heart feeling for these children as I remembered how they were taken out of this apartment. And I immediately called police stations and asked them, where do you take children like this? And they told me about emergency shelters in most cities, of course, in mine in New York.
Right.
And the next few things happened were just automatic. I called emergency shelters and I introduced myself on the phone and I said I wanted to come in. Was there any way I could come in maybe in the evening and read stories before these children went to sleep? And, you know, I said, I don't know much about what happens at this shelter, but I know you keep these children safe. And they welcomed me in. They invited me to come in and read stories.
And so when you had that flash in your mind, like, oh, I remember this newscast and I've got to figure this out. Was that the same time that you had that big question of, is this the next 30 years of my life? Is this how I see
Yes.
it? Okay. And how long ago was that?
That was 26 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you took quick action immediately after have this voice asking you this question. And it's like with the ripple effect, your thoughts went firing into new spaces.
Yes, it was automatic. You know, something was happening that started with that question. And I would think it would be fair to say it had been brewing in me, but I wasn't aware of it until that question from out of the blue. And I knew it came from inside me. And then everything happened automatically. If you had asked me the day before, are you going to call an emergency shelter tomorrow and see if you can reach to the kids? I would have said, I have no idea why you would ask me that question. It's
right.
But it just sort of like unraveled. And so I was aware that this was a very different part of me that was acting and reacting. I was aware, but I went along with it because something in me felt that this was right. This is nice. I wanted to see what's going to happen.
Right.
And I went, and I loved reading to those children. I could see by the looks on their faces, by the clothes they were wearing, that they had been afraid and traumatized and, you know, in some cases hurt and afraid and alone. And they're in this strange place. I could tell all of those feelings. I could feel them from those children. And my heart was just filled with love. I wasn't allowed to touch them or, you know, put them in my lap, of course, but I wanted to just hold them all.
Oh, right.
And, you know, I couldn't, but I was managing to read the stories. Meanwhile, my brain was asking myself these questions like, what is this world and how can I help and how did I get here? But I kept going back week after week, that shelter and a few others, and I just never felt more grounded. And, you know, and I had been through a full day of work, and I was in my suit, sitting on the floor because I didn't have many chairs that were for adults in these rooms, and I just fell in love with them. But what happened was the real turning point was I followed to where they were going to sleep after I read the stories one night. And most of the children had been in clothes that didn't fit well and that were soiled because it was an emergency shelter and they were just brought there recently within the day or hours. And I saw they were sleeping in the same clothes. Now they were safe and I was aware that they were safe here where they might not have been before. But they were moving uncomfortably because the clothes didn't fit, and there were 2 or 3 on a surface trying to go to sleep, and it just broke my heart. And I had this memory of my mom and sitting at our bed. We're 4 kids, and our beds, and she would tell us stories and laugh with us, and you know, snacks and cookies and pajamas, of course, and that's what stood out. They're wearing their clothes, and where are the soft, pretty pajamas for the girls, and where are the nice, you know, baseball pajamas for the boys? And that's how I grew up.
Comfy pajamas, the fun pajamas.
Right. Clean. And I asked as I was leaving, do you think I could bring pajamas next week? And the staff were wonderful. And they looked at me and they said, nobody ever asked that, but that'd be great.
Right.
And I did. And after I read to them, and they were always quiet, who's this lady reading to us? They couldn't even figure out what was going on. Never mind, who's this lady reading to us? So they never said anything, just listened to me read the stories. I told them that I had a surprise for them. And I started giving the pajamas out to the children. And they took them quietly. And then the staff person would bring them into that room for a sleep. One little girl was so afraid of me, just deathly afraid of me.
Mm-hmm.
She kept backing away from me. She kept shaking her head no. She didn't want me to get close. She didn't want anything to do with the pretty pink pajamas I was holding out. And she watched me, though, from the corner, give them to the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept those pink ones that I was holding for her. And I went back over, and she was wearing a purple and pink top. And I gently, slowly knelt down in front of her so she wouldn't be afraid. And I started to talk to her about the pajamas and how they matched what she was wearing and how they would fit her and how soft. Did she want to touch them a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
She just looked at me and she leaned in and she asked me, what are pajamas?
Mm-hmm.
That's when really my head just exploded. And it's a simple thing, but I just couldn't comprehend everything that led up to that moment for her,
Mm-hmm.
what her life was like, that she didn't know what pajamas were. She was so afraid of me. And I had to explain to this little girl
Mm-hmm.
what pajamas are. And it just was so hard for me to stay composed and to tell her. And, she took them and she went inside with this caregiver and she put them on and then she came out so she could show me. And that just tore me up. Just more than any success I'd ever had in any career or anything I had done.
Mm-hmm.
That I felt like that's the glove I was meant to wear.
Right. So before I ask you more questions about this, I am curious about something. If we can go back for a second, that night where you had that question, where you asked yourself, is this what the next 30 years of my life is going to look like? Is this what I'm going to do? Is this how I'm going to live my life? I know that you mentioned later that it might have been brewing a little bit inside you, but you didn't really pay very much attention to it until that night. I'm just curious about what else you might have been experiencing, even if it was subtle and in the background, because I'm just curious that for you to have that strong voice and that question, you must have been experiencing other intense moments at work or in your life that sort of led you to this big question coming up for you. So is there any insight there for that?
Yes, definitely. I'm the firstborn to Italian parents. My father off the boat from Italy. And I know they expected their firstborn, of course, a girl, to get married and have children, have grandchildren for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what was expected. And although they wanted me to get an education, my dad, because he came from another country and you get an education in America, and he did, I think that's what was expected. But early on, that didn't feel right to me. I wanted to pursue my own path.
Right.
But I think it got in because I loved my family, my extended family. It was all about love and, Italian. So it was about food, and food and love go together.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they were proud of me, but I think they often wondered, because sometimes they said, what about a family? And I just said, I love what I'm doing. But it must have gotten in. It must have gotten in. And there must have been a little place in my heart that was empty because I didn't pursue that. Now, I believe in God. I believe in the universe. I believe that we're one. And I believe this was meant the way my family would be, that I would have these children as my family and give back as a mother in this small way, never to be compared with a mother who's got the number one job in the world.
Right.
But it was the way I think was my way. But I think, to answer your question, it was my upbringing that had that constant wonder about where was my family going to come from.
Wow. And so that is a really big reflection, a big piece that you've just shared about something that someone would not just know just by looking at you or even reading about the work that you've done since having this big epic moment in your reflection, but that's so cool to hear how the pieces fit together. So it was the upbringing, right? In terms of that was constant in terms of where's my family going to come from, and what's that going to be like. In addition to that, did you experience any like turmoil in your work or in how you were living your life that had you feeling unsatisfied in any way? Or was your life moving too quickly that you didn't know that that was even happening for you?
It was moving too quickly. And the turmoil came when I realized
Mm-hmm.
that the impact these children and this simple gesture was making was far more meaningful than the trivial work I had been doing up to that point.
Mm-hmm. Now, these kids, like you said that you went to a few shelters and you would go back week after week, and they were emergency shelters. So is it that you were meeting new children every single time, or were they the same children, but maybe different children coming on each week? Were you meeting new kids all the time, or were they the same ones?
New kids all the time, at least in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
because in the emergency shelters, and when I started, I only knew a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they were for. And a lot of them were anonymous because of obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever took the children didn't want them to be found, they
Right.
wanted them to be safe. And if there was a mom or a grandmother or a sister or a brother, so they were always different. These were
Mm-hmm.
emergency shelters where they began
Right.
the process of looking into their situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when this young child asked you, what are pajamas? And you could see prior to her asking that question, like how scared she was to look at the pajamas or come near the pajamas or come near you. Like just that whole interaction from that time to her asking, what are pajamas? I know that you mentioned how that was the point that you had such a internal response. Can you share can you describe that, what that experience was like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember I was kneeling down and I was really glad
Mm-hmm.
because it
Yeah.
really, really threw me. I
Mm-hmm.
never would have imagined that she would have asked me that question.
Yeah.
Never. And I remember thinking, I don't want her to be upset if she sees me cry or my eyes fill with tears or start to stammer. So I said, stay in control,
Mm-hmm.
explain to her because she doesn't know what pajamas are, be loving and, be gentle and say it simply so that she feels, um, okay to continue a conversation. I remember telling myself this,
Yeah.
prepping myself before I said anything because
Right.
I didn't want it to appear shocked because then she would be uncomfortable.
Sure. Right.
So I did that and I just simply stated matter of factly what pajamas were, that she could keep them,
Mm-hmm.
and they would look so nice on her, and you wear them to go to sleep. So, you have nice dreams and something very warm and loving. But I had to take hold of myself and prepare myself to be loving and let her be receptive.
Mm-hmm. And how did she receive that?
Thankfully, she received them calmly.
Mm.
She did take them, and I didn't know that she was going to come back out of the room to show me she had them on. So I don't know if the caregiver said, "You want to show the nice lady your
Right.
pajamas,"
Right.
or
Right.
if she just opened the door because she felt comfortable finally with me. But I turned before I left, and she was there. I was surprised, and she had a little, tiny little smile because she was still very afraid and very confused.
Of course.
And that was the third thing that just cemented in my mind this. I have to do something about this.
Mm-hmm. So after bringing pajamas to this shelter and having this encounter with this young child, what was next for you? Did that give you like ammunition to pivot in some way or to take charge in a different way? Or what unfolded for you after that? Because obviously that was a very meaningful moment.
Yes, it was very confusing for me, very confusing because I said I have this career that's going well. I have a mortgage. I have a life that everyone knows me in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable. I know what to do. And what am I thinking here?
Mm-hmm.
What is this? What is this about? Why do I want to only do that? It was really frightening because there was nobody I could tell. I didn't tell anybody for months, and I kept going to the shelters, and this passion and compassion just kept growing. And I wasn't the same person at the office. I used to be in at 6 and leave at 8. I was totally dedicated.
Right.
And never took a lunch, left early. And here I was going in late to take advantage of a sale or a store that opened early, and then taking lunch to go to the store, and leaving early with a suitcase full of pajamas, and nobody knew what was in the suitcase, so I could go to the shelter not too late.
Right.
I was a different person, and people saw it, but nobody asked me. And I just kept just kept my head down. I had nothing, because I didn't know what was up. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no answers. So I just didn't confront what I was thinking. I just acted. And it was really scary and really lonely. And the self-doubt and, all those things that go through your mind when you don't share any of these things were really eating me up.
Sounds like you were just following your heart. You were letting your heart lead the way.
Absolutely. It was the only place I felt good anymore, sitting on the floor in my business suit with these kids. I felt connected to something, to someone.
Sure. And so are you telling me that when you were going out to all of these shelters, that no one knew you were going to the shelters? Like
No one knew.
This was just something you were doing on your own?
Yeah.
And what was the reason for keeping it on the down low?
Because I would rehearse in my mind what I'd say to people. And I'm going to give up my career of 12 years and my salary, and I'm going to just go shopping and buy pajamas and bring them to all these kids who don't have them. And when I said that to myself, I said, what a fool. What am I doing? What is anyone going to say? And so I didn't say anything. And finally, I said, let me trust this one friend. And she was also in the business world, but not close enough to know anyone in my business.
Right.
She was also single. So I thought, maybe she'll want to help me. And I had, went for drinks. I had 2 glasses of wine because I had rehearsed what I was going to say. It sounded just like what I just said to you. It sounded ridiculous.
Right.
And I said it, and she shot me right down. She said, what do you think you're doing? You wasted 12 years. How are you going to pay your bills? Who's going to help you? You think you're changing their lives? I'm telling you, it was like boom, boom, boom. It just came true. My worst fear came true. And I just clammed up for a long time. And then I met a nice man that I started to date. And I said, okay, he clearly thinks this is going to be a 2-income relationship. I'm not so sure.
Right.
But let me just try it, because if he's going to give me the same 3rd degree as my friend,
right,
well, I can't stay. But I told him what I did, and he said, I think you should go for it. And that was like a light bulb went off. Like, I'm not crazy. There's somebody who gets this.
Yeah.
And he supported me, and I married him, and we celebrated 25 years this year.
Oh,
so
my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And he was right there. He didn't make enough money for both of us. So there were a lot of sacrifices and cutbacks. And he was willing. And I was grateful, though I was a workaholic now for the children.
Right. Yeah. But in a different way, right?
In a very different way. But, he believes in following your heart.
Right. With all of your, pajama distribution, at what point did the next phase come through? I know that the pajama program was founded in 2001, but I'm just curious about, did it start fairly quickly, or were you focusing on doing the individual shelters for a period of time, or?
Yep. I never thought it would grow more than what I was doing.
Right.
And people finally, when they were finding out, and the shelter people were sharing the information, people wanted to help. Some wonderful media outlets, newspapers and TV shows said, oh, this is a nice thing. Can we write about it? Can you tell your story? And it grew beyond New York. And before I knew it, there were volunteer chapters everywhere, and people who wanted to give grants. And, getting 501c3 was a process, but we got it. And it blossomed because I think the story and that little girl, her pain and her loneliness transferred from her mouth to mine to
Right.
tell her story, and other people heard what I heard. Oh, this is not okay. We can
Right.
fix this. This is not rocket science. This is love. And
Hmm.
it is. It's about love. It's not about the actual material of the pajamas. It's about what they don't have, that love, that stability, knowing someone cares about them and wants to wrap their arms around them and
Hmm.
make them feel good. And that's
Right.
that's what it's really about.
Yeah. And so it seems like the message finally caught on. You were getting your grants, things were blossoming. And truly, that is exactly what I was thinking when you were sharing your experience. That, yeah, it was like from this little girl's voice to you. Like it's almost like you were the messenger of her voice.
I feel like I channeled her.
You definitely channeled her. It's mesmerizing how when we really follow our instincts where it can take us.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Right.
We all have that ability, but we shut it down. So
Hmm.
the longer we keep it locked away, the harder it is to open that door and let it go. We're so afraid we've kept it locked up like a secret, and now we're going to take a chance on putting our heart right there in the
Right.
middle of the room.
Yeah. Yeah. So now tell me, so you took a risk to, I mean, clearly at one point you were secretly doing all the pajama, going to the sales and leaving at lunchtime and going in early to the stores and, leaving with your suitcase after work and, delivering all these pajamas. But at what point did you walk away from that business world?
Well, I tried to do part-time, then I tried to do consulting work, then I said I'd work at McDonald's if I had to. So I don't know, I guess it was a little more than a year. And I was with my now husband, and I had my one bedroom. And so we both lived there. And then I just decided I had to jump. But one of the big things that happened at that time was that Parenting Magazine called. And back then, there were paper magazines, on the newsstands and in people's mailboxes when they subscribed.
Mm-hmm.
And they wrote a small, tiny article about this woman giving pajamas to these children. And the impact of that little article and the people who felt, like I said, felt what I felt when I told them the story in the article, they sent thousands of boxes and packages
Mm-hmm.
to my apartment, thousands, and letters.
Oh,
And
wow.
they asked for more details so that I could get a grant or at least be considered for a grant. And that's when I realized that this is a responsibility. This isn't something I could just
Right.
wing.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that so many people wanted to be part of that I had to respect that. And they were trusting me. So I had to do everything I could to grow this with their blessing. And so that's when I couldn't handle it on the side anymore. It was
Right.
literally boxes in the apartment my
Mhm.
husband and I now shared. That was 3 rooms, and it was overwhelming. So
Right.
I jumped in with his blessing.
Right. And let's talk for a moment about being in that media world. As you said, you were working that ladder, that corporate ladder of the man's world, and you were making your mark and you were pretty high up there. Obviously, at the time, you were stepping into the complete unknown, right?
Yes.
What did that experience feel like for you internally?
Like jumping into the abyss. I mean, I had no idea, and I didn't let myself think about it because I would have scared myself right out of it. So I just kept going full speed ahead. There was so much work to do. There were boxes to unpack from that magazine article. There were calls constantly from all the shelters that heard about
Mhm.
what I was doing. I had to keep records. I had to keep notes. I had to shop. I had to go. I had to deliver. And I just did it one step in front of the other. I had to create flyers. I had to have a website. I didn't know any of this.
Mhm.
And I just kept myself busy one step at a time. And just so I wouldn't have a chance to say, what am I doing? Can I do this? Am I crazy? Because that's what would creep in.
So you were afraid that you would talk yourself out.
Oh, absolutely. And I think fear paralyzes us, and we do talk ourselves out of things because we're afraid, because we don't know how to do it,
Mhm.
because we think nobody will understand or help us. And it's all wrong. It's all wrong way thinking.
Sure. So, given that you didn't really allow yourself to feel and or even experience whatever you might have been experiencing, would you do it differently if you had a chance, like a do-over? Like, of course, the pajama program, I can't imagine that being any different, but the way you showed up for yourself or the way you took care of yourself in the process, would you do it differently now, or would you say, I would do it exactly like that?
I think I'd have to let it be because I needed the lessons learned. And I think that's because I teach the lessons learned. So now I can be a cheerleader that both understands all the fears of somebody starting something new, whether it's nonprofit or business. It's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Can I do this? Why am I leaving something? Why am I leaving people's advice on the table? Why am I choosing this that isn't common, unclear path?
Mm-hmm.
I get that. And I think it's because I learned the hard way that I can teach easier ways and that they don't have to be alone. I coach so many people. I mentor so many people. I always offer for people to call me if they need a sounding board. So I think I had to go through that because of my own insecurities to
Right.
learn lessons
Right.
and to be able to know that other people can identify and can trust me. Because even in my book, I put all the bad things, all the wrong things I did, all the things I experienced, all the negativity I received and felt. And I found my moxie and
Yeah.
they can too.
Right. You found your moxie. Okay. So I have a question for you. So the question is, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals, they're typically in one of three places when they come. Some people are getting started, like sometimes people say, "Oh, I know therapy is good for me, so I just want to start somewhere," and bring a bunch of things. Or sometimes people are a bit more intentional. They're like, "I've gone through ABC 1, 2, 3, or this is what my life has been full of, and I just want to start this process to be healthy." And some people are in the middle. Maybe there's an acute stressor or something that's going on, and it's triggering a lot of other life turmoil. And some people are looking back and they want to gain closure or have some personal growth moments and take some learning with new perspectives so they can move forward in their life for maybe the next chapter. So, for yourself, with your untold story, with everything that you have shared so far, would you say that you are just getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I'm in the middle because after 20 years of being the executive director of Pajama Program and growing this beyond my wildest dreams,
Mm-hmm.
thanks to so many people and and learning the number one lesson that I think is my number one lesson in this life is if people used to say, "Oh, look at one person, look what one person can do."
Mm-hmm.
And one day I just said, it's not about the power of one. It's not the power of one that changes things. It's the power of one another that moves mountains and moves people. And I think when I learned that lesson, I said, I have to share this. This is life. It's about love. It's not about the material of the pajamas. And that goes for everything. Business. You have to love what you're doing, love who you work with, love your leadership, be
Mm-hmm.
inspired. And we've got to do this together.
Mm-hmm.
So I passed the baton of executive director and said, I want to speak about this and teach people this and write about it so they know they're not alone and they know it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say I'm in the middle of my journey about what life's about.
Mm-hmm. And so, in terms of your untold story, so if you're in the middle, how would you know you're looking back? At what point, what would be different for you to know that, okay, I'm looking back now at this part of my life?
I'll be in my rocking chair at age 95,
Mm-hmm.
reviewing, what I did, how I could have done it differently. Should I have done it differently?
Okay.
You know, what's my legacy? Did I do okay? Did I
Mm.
touch lives? Did I impact lives? Did I build something? Did I serve and not just take? I think that will be the, the moment of truth.
Right. Right. Okay. So, in everything that we've spoken about so far, in terms of where you came from, your work ethic, your lifestyle, and taking all these risks and going into the abyss and working this process, generating a lot of buzz, even though you didn't know you were going to be generating buzz, but all the buzz that was created and the ripple effect of everyone, just different people getting on board to contribute. I mean, it is very inspirational. And I understand that there was a big part of you that couldn't stop and think about what you were experiencing or going through because you were too scared, right? You mentioned fear being paralyzing.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned not just fear being paralyzing, but you also mentioned that there was a lot of self doubt, which is why you weren't even telling some of your colleagues or any of your colleagues what you were up to because you didn't really know how it would all be received. So knowing all of that, I'm really curious about how your untold story affected your mental well-being. So how was your mental health impacted during this time? So if we kind of zone in on that fear being really paralyzing and that self-doubt, being really loud, can you speak more about those two pieces?
Sure. Well, I thought in the climb up the corporate ladder that everything was fine. I thought I was in control
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's what some of us think good mental health is. You're in control.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I was in control. I had a place in society. Everyone was comfortable where I was. I felt good and successful, and I was on track. And there was no mental health issue in my mind. Not that we talked about it then anyway, but looking back, I didn't feel like I had any concerns about my health, emotional, mental, physical.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly when things started to happen with these children and making their way into my heart, I felt everything cracking.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear, the initial fear of what makes you think you can do this,
Mm-hmm.
really paralyzed me. And I know I share that, and the others who feel, so many of us feel that everything is going to fall apart. And we're so afraid of that falling apart
Right.
time.
Right.
But it's the falling apart and, coming back together stronger that is worth the falling apart part. So that falling apart was filled for me with sadness and doubt and fear and what are people going to think and why am I doing this and who said I can do this and am I going to be homeless and what are people going to think, and it was really, really very frightening period of time.
Right.
And I came back from it a little at a time,
Mm-hmm.
a very little at a time. Meanwhile, I never felt my heart fuller.
Right.
But back then, I didn't think that was as valuable as my sanity.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's more valuable because it then will feed your sanity, and your sanity will take the cue from your heart that this is right.
Right.
This is how it's supposed to be.
Right. And so tell me about your relationships with people. Did they change?
So much.
Yeah.
So much. I can say there are just a couple in my life from those early days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard. Somebody said it's not that people don't want you to change. They don't want to change. How they see you, how you fit into their lives is uncomfortable for them for a number of reasons. So you do find people that you really resonate with in your heart, rather than people who are with the same goals and financial dreams and material things. That's all well and good, but if the hearts aren't matching, it's all superficial, and then it goes away, which it did.
Right. And so when sometimes if individuals who are really close to you didn't align with where you were going or what you were stepping into, did you take it personal or were you able to speak up about it?
I took it personally. I did not speak up about it. I felt hurt, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But then I learned, another lesson that, you need people in your life who are going to resonate heart to heart. And the people that resonated with me were the ones I was supposed to be with at the time. It all leads you, if you are open and you ask
Mm-hmm.
for, what is my purpose? I know I'm meant to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You have to trust that people will fall off, new people will come in, things are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you stay true to yourself, you will find your way.
Right. Okay. And I've got this one random question because I know that you mentioned you made your way all the way to Oprah. So, what was that experience like? I'm so curious.
There's no one in the world like Oprah. And,
Yes.
and I knew before what we all know, how she seems from a distance, but she was so real. I mean, she looked me in the eyes and absorbed the answers.
Mm-hmm.
She asked me questions that she was sincerely interested in hearing. No one knows purpose like Oprah Winfrey.
Mm-hmm.
She knows it. And I felt like she really heard me. And it was just a real bond. And I felt free because I trusted her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's her gift,
Mm-hmm.
that she didn't come up, with a golden spoon and things handed to her, quite the opposite. And when she pours her heart out and she invites you into her pain and her joy,
Mm-hmm.
there's no better friend, whether it's a friend you see every week or a soul friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why she has the love that she has from strangers, because she emits this open arm, welcoming feeling to you
Mm-hmm.
that you can't help but feel like I must be doing something right.
Yeah, that's a lovely feeling. Okay, Genevieve, tell us, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
I think it's the headline. It's never too late to find your purpose. I teach finding your purpose in chapter 2. It's a different world where we're encouraged to follow our heart. I teach it's about love. I teach how to be a voice to move the world. I think we're finally in a place where that's not a foreign concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I just encourage everyone to really, I have an exercise on my website to how to find your purpose. If you want to take that,
Mm-hmm.
you'll be amazed. And if you take one step toward it, I think you will physically feel joyful
Mm-hmm.
and know that, okay, got to take another step.
Okay, amazing. A wonderful and powerful message. Okay, so tell us, what is your game changing inspiration that is close to you that reflects your story in terms of, aside from all the things that you already shared, is there like an inspirational quote or book or an event or something that you were part of that really spoke to you, that got you to pivot to the life that you have now leaned into?
I think what I had said before about it's not the power of one that changes things, it's
Mm,
the power of one another that moves
yeah.
mountains and moves people.
How did you get to that realization of it's not the power of one, it's the power of one another?
I would often just be flabbergasted at how many people would call and want to get in touch. And I don't know how these people had heard about helping in their own area under pajama program's name and how can they do it. And it was just a miracle. This momentum was
Mm,
incredible. And I had often heard before pajama program, as I was a kid, I heard, oh, the power of one, they
right.
would name people who did one thing. And then somebody said that to me. And I remember thinking, no, it's not me at all. If it was just me, I'd be Santa Claus with,
Right.
a sack of pajamas
Right.
walking around the city. It's not. And it just sort of fell out of my mouth, that phrase that now I use all the time. And from that moment on,
Mhm.
that's what it is. I know that. Like I know, I'm wearing a pink dress.
This is huge. The power of one another. Even when you said it the first time, it resonates so much. And that momentum of people, that must have been so really amplifying your ammunition that you already had. Like you had this ammunition, you were in the abyss, and then people just kept showing up in different ways. So that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm still amazed.
Yeah, I would be too. All right. So, what is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Besides pajama program, of course, there's Our Children, HOUR, children, and Dress for Success. And I say the two because they were the executive directors and the founder were the first two people that invited me to ask for help, who mentored me,
Mm,
who gave me time and comfort knowing that even if you touch one human,
Mhm.
one person, you're making a difference.
Right.
And we all started that way. And that gave me a lot of courage and self-confidence. And, they invited me to be part of their world and to go to them when I felt stuck. And I have, and I'm so grateful for those two organizations and those leaders.
Right. Amazing. What wonderful shout outs. Okay. So if people want to connect with you, how can they? How are you findable?
I'm on all the social media channels.
Okay.
And my website has all the links, GenevievePituro.com.
Okay.
And my email is jen@GenevievePituro.com.
Perfect. Well, I believe we have grabbed all those handles and your links. So they are now available on your show notes page. So that's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Genevieve, guess what?
What?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm happy to have that opportunity. So thankful. Salima, thank you for this invitation.
Genevieve, I actually would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the deep story shared in this space today, for you to speak openly on the courage and risk you took to step down the corporate ladder, that you used all your resources to climb, and then to find a new path and a new ladder to climb, even when you didn't know what it was supposed to look like, and sharing, what you faced along the way, as well as how you brought all the pieces together. My goodness, I am truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing.
It's been my pleasure to dare and share with you, Salima, and your audience.
Amazing. So once again, Genevieve, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.